pleasure tonight to introduce our next speaker, Miss Sandy Peck-Garrity. Garrity, if I have that right? Yeah, okay. I don't know why I thought maybe I spelled it wrong. Sandy is an amazing person. She is very prolific with her writing, and our writing group has had the pleasure of listening to her chapter by chapter story. She has done probably at least 20 years, if not more, investigation into her mother's, research into her mother's genealogy, and has actually written a book, which is in our library. It's about her great-great-grandmother. Got that one right? Her name was Julia, and the name of the book is Julia on the Oregon Trail. And we're going to hear after Sandy speaks from Diane, who's one of a handful of people who help run our library on the second floor or third floor, and tell us about books, publications of people who live here. So that'll be fun to hear about. Meanwhile, Sandy has had that book published. She called it a little page book, which I'm sure is a terminology that writers use. Not familiar to me, but I'll ask you about that later. And she's going to share some of her story with us. Welcome, Sandy.
Thank you. I was watching Marty, and this looked like a place I would like to stand here. So, welcome. Yes, my story is set in San Francisco, 1888. And I would like to introduce, you could do the next slide, Mike. That's my great-grandmother, Nellie Fish, or Nellie Gorman Fish, and my great-grandfather. And you would have met my great-grandfather in the Julia on the Oregon Trail. He was a little boy of 10 when she was in the covered wagon coming across country. We're also going to talk about, in this little chapter that I'm going to read, his mother, Julia. And Julia, well, I'll tell another story about Julia, but now this is about Nellie and Milo. Let me go slide 4. Or slide 3. The Women's Cooperative Printing Union, or WCPU, was on 23rd, 1st Street. Nellie took the cable car from her Uncle Mike's apartment that morning, as she did every morning. Her corset was a bit too tight, making her breathless. A buggy rushed in front of the streetcar as the carriage crowd flew in the air, too close to the horse, causing it to rear up. The San Francisco Call newspaper building, the next slide, was under construction. Construction noises added to the energy of general anticipation of being a part of this thriving metropolis throwing itself into a new decade, the 1890s. She pulled the cord, lifted her skirts, and hopped off. Nellie bustled through the front door. The WCPU was in the Hicks Judd 3-stone limestone, perfect, 3-story limestone. Molly, another typesetter, greeted her. They walked over to the job board. The WCPU had a large clientele. They printed legal briefs, annual reports, flyers, books, spiritualist and feminist journals, newspapers, and billheads for hundreds of businesses. Lizzie G. Richmond, this is true, was manager and a suffragette. She trained and hired only women. Every morning, she posted a list of what jobs were running on each press. Several women stood around the job board. Nellie was short and wished she were taller, or the job board was higher. She pointed toward the carrier dove job. I met someone from this paper. Nellie turned to look at Molly. Molly pulled a pencil from behind her ear, jotted notes on a tablet, then looked back at Nellie. Nellie continued, his name is Milo. Seems nice enough. New they are. They got a check mark by compositor. Molly looked at her friend. If you asked me, I'd rather typeset than composite. My brain just doesn't work that fast. Molly put the pencil back behind her ear and the tablet in her pocket. Editing is one thing. Doing it while letters come down the chute, upside down and backwards, is quite another. I see the carrier dove is using the Cottrell press. Think I'll walk down and see if you're here. Nellie said, then swung around and headed down the hall. In her peripheral vision, she saw a shadow on the left side of someone rushing towards her, then felt his presence on her right. Morning, Milo smiled down at her, a little out of breath. Had a dickens of a time finding my way in this big city. Morning yourself, she said, and looked up at him. There was that impish grin he had, and her heart fluttered again. She felt herself flush. Job board says the carrier dove needs a compositor. We do. Milo put his hands in his pockets and tilted his head as he looked down at her. Any suggestions? Well, as a matter of fact, I do, Nellie said, hand on hip. We've scheduled the press for 6 hours today. Nellie furrowed his brows. How soon could she start? Well, how about now? Nellie raised her eyebrows. You? Milo truly looked surprised. Well then, press is upstairs and you can meet my mother. Even though he was a good foot taller, she slowed her pace to match his. The heels of her boots clicked on the marble steps. As she stepped onto a landing, Nellie bumped into a tall woman running downstairs who wore a gray dress with a pocket watch pinned to the left side of her bodice. My great-great-grandmother always had this pocket watch pinned to the bodice. Robert's great-great-grandmother always had a pocket watch pinned to her bodice. Mother, think I found our compositor. Milo stepped up behind Nellie. Nellie, this is Julia Schlesinger, owner of the Carrier Dove, and my mother. Well, how nice to meet you, my dear. Julia extended a hand. I'll come up to the press in an hour or so and we can talk. Julia continued running downstairs as Milo and Nellie headed up for the Cottrell press. The Cottrell linotype press took up most of the small room. Milo picked up a pile of typed papers his mother had left for him on a small table by the door. Hey, shall we give this a go? We can work out any kinks right away. His fingers knew their way around that 90-character keyboard. Been printing mother's lead paper for 7 years now, since I was 14. Letter molds moved towards, this is letter molds moved towards the casting section to become molten lead alloy slub, or in other words, a linotype. I've used the Cottrell press often. Nellie walked over to the rail-like chute. It's similar to most linotypes. Her hands flew as she fixed his mistakes. I'm usually better than this, really, he said, and walked back to the keyboard and typed in the next line. Nellie remained next to the assembler and checked for errors as she read the letter molds upside down and backwards. Her fingers flew as she pulled letters out, correcting misspelled words, adding spaces, capital letters, or commas from pieces in trays along the chute. Doing this alone takes a long time, he said, and ran a hand through his hair. With you here, we can get a lot more done in 6 hours. The first 8x8 page was finished by the time his mother returned. Julia examined it. Excellent. Julia snapped the paper in a sign of approval. She held out the first page of her paper. With your help, we'll be ready for our international meeting next month. Milo walked over to look at the page, then looked down at his mother. She nodded and asked, "Do you want to work for my paper?" "Well, I've seen this paper around. There are a lot of articles about spiritualism." Nellie folded her arms across her chest. "As a Catholic, I'm just not familiar with this." "Well, spiritualism recognizes women's equality." Julia narrowed her eyes and lifted her chin as she spoke. "I write articles to give comfort to children, reminding them of angels that are always with them, guiding. I also write articles about suffragettes." Nellie nodded her head through a scowl. "Oh, very interesting." She was for women's suffrage. Spiritualism, however, was another matter. "Well, Nellie, what's your last name?" Julia said. "Gorman. Nellie Gorman." Nellie answered and wondered if this woman ever smiled. "Nellie Gorman, can you join us at this press Mondays and Wednesdays for 6 hours?" Julia asked with raised eyebrows. "Yes, I can," and Nellie was hired. She could work on other printing jobs at the WCPU the other days of the week. Nellie was curious about Milo. She liked him and wanted to get to know him better. Milo and Julia talked with Lizzie Richmond and arranged for only Nellie to work on their paper. The Carrier Dove printed bi-weekly, mostly opinions and informative articles about spiritualism and the suffrage movement, all written by Milo's mother. There are many more chapters of Nellie about Milo and